So good morning, everybody. First of all, thanks to the speakers for agreeing really to give a presentation today. That this is the second sort of full day on the Institute of Energy Futures at the Research Festival. I think the first day was mainly geared towards a wider sort of audience. We had some externals, not as many as we would have liked, but I thought the event was quite useful, really, to see what the researchers, the academic staff in the different centers sort of are doing. And I mean, definitely I found it quite useful. I mean, today we have a wider range of presentations from members of the different research centers aligned with the Institute of Energy Futures. So again, thank you all for coming and for preparing the presentations. Would like also to thank Seb for doing all the hard work of organizing the various events, and Maureen, who is really supporting us both last week and then this week and today with the organizing the event and recording the presentations. Just to let you know that we record the presentations, and then, if you don't mind, probably put it on the website. I would like also to thank Professor Tassos Karayiannis and Professor Maria Kolokotroni for volunteering to chair the sessions. Tassos in the morning and Maria in the afternoon. Now, if there are no queries, we'll make a start. Pass on to Tassos. But before I do that, I'll just would like to say that really we have 20-minute slots for each presentation. So try to finish your presentations in 15 minutes, and then we'll have five minutes question and answer sort of session. I'll try and share my screen very briefly and see whether I managed to do that. Just to go through the program very quickly. Don't know, I think you can see my screen now. Yeah. So yeah. We're starting the morning session at 9:40 or 9:35. So Tassos will be chairing. Then we have a number of presentations from Xinyan, Wang, Chun, Salman, Masoudi, Soltani, and Ahmed, Zobaa, and Zahir, Dehouche. Then we have a short break at 11:20, and then we carry on with Abishek, Lahiri, Atanas, Ivanov, and McClure. Then we have lunch at about 12:40, and then about 40 minutes lunch. Then come back at 13:30, and then we have the afternoon presentations that Maria will chair, and we hope to finish at about just before 4 o'clock this afternoon. So without further ado, I'll like to invite Tassos to take over and chair the morning session. So Tassos, yeah, over to you.
Welcome everybody from me as well. As Salmas just said. So for the first part of the session this morning, we have 5 lectures, and I think all the people are here or will be here. Then, as Salmas said, we'll take a break, followed by three presentations starting at 11:20. Again, we will be trying to keep to a time schedule for people joining in. So I will be reminding the speakers when it's about 15 minutes that they need to conclude. That will allow 5 minutes for a discussion so that we are all comfortable through the presentations. Okay, so as you know, new fuels, hydrogen included, are on the agenda of every university now that has research in energy and of governments across the world. We had a recent success with PSRC, and Dr. Wang got a nice new grant, so I think he's here to talk to us about the work that he's doing. So first, on behalf of the Institute, let us congratulate Dr. Wang for his success to PSRC and wish him to be one of many, as he says, his research career, and invite him to deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much, Tassos, for your kind introduction. So I'm trying to get my presentation. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So my name is Xinyan Wang. Today it's my great pleasure to kick off the morning session of the research festival of our energy future. So the title of my presentation is New Novel Energy Storage and Field Design by Nanobubble Technology. So there are 5 parts in my presentation. So the first part will be the challenges of moving towards net zero. So the UK has set out ambitious goal to decarbonize. The goal for 2050 is achieve net zero, and we will see in the intermediate time we'll have a very ambitious goal as well. For example, by 2030, we'll achieve 68% carbon reduction, and also by 2035 we'll achieve 78% carbon reduction. I think they are all very ambitious goals because we only have 8 years to achieve the 68% carbon reduction. And the transport sector is one of the most challenging sector, and currently it's produced around 31% carbon emissions across the country. And there's an increasing consensus we need to move to renewable energy and electricity in order to achieve net zero target. The right graph shows a final energy demand, which can be used for future transport. As shown in the 2050 bar, that's the prediction of the energy demand by 2050. We'll be able to see around 20% of the energy will be provided by gas fuel. It can be hydrogen or renewable natural gas, and around 60% of the energy will be provided by liquid fuel. They are all renewable liquid fuels, and around 18% of the energy will be provided by renewable electricity. So in total, we'll see around 80% of the energy will be still be used in combustion system, and around 20% of the energy will be used for electric system by 2050. So the hydrogen is an excellent renewable energy carrier. If we produce the hydrogen by using water electrolysis and by using renewable electricity, it can be produced from solar energy or wind energy or any other renewable sources. Then we'll be able to produce net zero hydrogen. It can be used in industry, or it can be used for the transport sector to speed up the decarbonization process. And currently, there are more and more countries who are committing to work more on research and development on hydrogen technologies. And in the UK government also set out the UK hydrogen strategy, and the recently published 10-point plan also highlight the significance of hydrogen energy. However, it is not straightforward to apply hydrogen in industry and in particular in transport sector. There are mainly two barriers. The first one is hydrogen storage. So the left graph shows different methods for hydrogen storage. For the physical based, we have compressed gas. It can go up to 800 bar to store the hydrogen in the tank. It's not so expensive, but it has relatively low hydrogen storage density. And for other two, the cold temperature with compressed bottle or the liquefied hydrogen, they have relatively higher storage capability, but they are all expensive. And also for the material-based approach, they can the storage capability is relatively high, but they are expensive and also they are inconvenient for onboard use for transport sector. And the second barrier is hydrogen infrastructure, because hydrogen is not compatible with existing fuel station. So we need to put a lot of investment to the hydrogen infrastructure. And also it can take very long time to complete the infrastructure. So it will be very difficult to realize immediate carbon reduction target. So in order to address these challenges around hydrogen, and we proposed a novel nanobubbles enriched fuel concept. It is a completely new hydrogen or energy storage solution. So basically we put a significant amount of hydrogen nanobubbles into liquid fuels. The liquid fuels can be conventional fossil fuel, gasoline or diesel. And also it can be biofuels. We call it net zero or zero carbon, net zero biofuels. And also we can put it, the hydrogen nanobubbles into zero carbon liquid fuels. It can be ammonia. So the second beauty of this concept is we as the hydrogen nanobubbles are stored in liquid fuels, so we can make use of existing fuels infrastructure, and also the fuel can be readily used in existing and future zero carbon combustion systems. What are nanobubbles? So nanobubbles are unique bubbles in comparison to larger bubbles. So they are quite very, very tiny. We can't see them directly, but compared to the larger bubbles, they can stay stable in liquid. Because for the larger bubbles, they can easily escape from the liquid due to the buoyancy. And also they have the right graph shows some optical measurements results of the hydrogen nanobubbles, and we can see these tiny bubbles. And also the second feature of the nanobubbles is they are negatively charged. This is a diagram of the distribution of the ions. You will see the results of zeta potential, which is used to describe the charge. We'll see they are all negative charged. Due to the negatively charged feature, so the bubbles can repel each other, so they can keep stable in the liquid. As highlighted in the right graphs, we'll be able to see the bubble size and the bubble concentration. They can keep stable almost for 3 months, so they are quite unique. And second main feature of the nanobubbles is they have very high internal gas density. So the gas density can range from 40% to the same level of its liquid phase. So a number of research have been done to prove the internal gas density of nanobubbles. So the first work by molecular dynamic simulations showed that the nitrogen nanobubbles in water, the density is around 300 kilogram per cubic meter, which is around 40% of liquid nitrogen density. And the second one, similarly by MD simulations, they have shown that the hydrogen nanobubbles in water can be around 30 kilogram per cubic meter, which is around 52% of liquid hydrogen density. And also another work which was done by AFM measurements, they have shown that the air density inside the nanobubbles is around 1,000 kilogram per cubic meter, which is equivalent to its liquid phase. Due to the two key features of nanobubble, so it is possible to store hydrogen or any other gaseous fuels in liquids. The first key feature, the high stability of nanobubbles in liquid, enables a stable storage and transportation of fuels. And second feature, high density of nanobubbles enables large amount of hydrogen storage in liquid fuels. So first, we will be able to make use of existing fueling system. We can use conventional fueling gun to fuel our cars. And secondly, we have done initial calculations of the hydrogen storage potential. So as shown by the right graph, by using by adding 30% of hydrogen by volume, we'll be able to store up to 4% hydrogen by mass in liquid fuels. And the added hydrogen mass will be able to increase the calorific value of the fuel because the hydrogen has very high calorific value compared to the conventional liquid fuels. For example, we can increase the calorific value by 7%. This means that 10% of the energy will be provided by hydrogen. And another key benefit of nanobubbles fuel is we will be able to improve the spraying process, and highlight by the right graphs, we'll see better optimization of the injection process if we add bubbles into liquid fuels. And also the lower part of the results is shown of the spraying without the bubbles. However, for the conventional technology, by adding large bubbles, it has a problem of unstable spraying process, because the large bubbles can be disappear or can be evolved to be smaller bubbles. So the spraying process is not stable. But by using very stable nanobubbles will resolve this issue and make use of the improved spraying process. And second benefit is improve the combustion process due to the significantly higher flame speed of hydrogen. And the higher flame speed also enables lean combustion and ultra diluted combustion for combustion system. This therefore will be able to improve the engine efficiency and reduce emissions. So in summary, the proposed nanobubble fuels will have immediate CO2 reduction due to a higher calorific value, lower carbon content, and improved optimization and faster combustion, as well as the applicable to existing infrastructure for faster adoption of the fuel concept. And secondly, we'll be able to achieve net zero if we are using renewable liquid fuels, for example, ethanol or methanol for the base fuel. And this will be enabled by faster flame speed and higher calorific value due to the added hydrogen. And also we did a calculation of the potential of CO2 reduction. So similarly, by adding 30% of hydrogen nanobubbles by volume, we'll be able to achieve around 15% CO2 reduction. As mentioned by Tassos, recently we got another EPRC project on a completely new net zero future fuel. And the concept is we combine the ammonia and hydrogen nanobubbles. We know ammonia is another important zero carbon vector for future transport or industry. However, ammonia has some disadvantage in terms of lower flame speed and as well as lower calorific value. So it will be a great combination if we add hydrogen into liquid ammonia. So the concept is we use renewable energy to produce hydrogen as well as ammonia. Then we put hydrogen nanobubbles into liquid ammonia. Then we'll be able to use this new fuel in existing transport sectors, and the produced exhaust will be only water, so it can be recycled to produce the fuel again. So the novelty of this concept is it is a completely carbon-free fuel, and the added hydrogen can optimize combustion process, increase energy density, and also the combination of the two will improve the engine efficiency. And also as a fertilizer, we have extensive experience in handling ammonia, and also we have existing ammonia infrastructure, so we can make use of this infrastructure to get faster adoption of this new fuel. And also it is capable to support the circular economy. So, short summary. Hydrogen nanobubble fuel is a new concept of a fuel to store hydrogen or any other form of energy in liquid fuels. They can be readily used in existing combustion engines in a range of applications to maximize the usage of hydrogen in transport sector. The hydrogen nanobubble fuels have the potential to reduce carbon emissions by around 50% and also enable 100% reduction if renewable liquid fuels are used, for example, ammonia. Researchers are working on several fundamental questions to realize this exciting concept. Dr. Biswell is a new research fellow who is working on nanobubble generation system as well as spring and combustion process by using optical measurements. And Mr. Hassan Lu, who is a new PhD student who is working on nanobubble dynamics in liquid fuels by using MD simulations. So hopefully we'll get very exciting results and have the opportunity to report to you in the next research festival. So that's all. Thank you very much. And also I would like to acknowledge UKI and the EPA SRC for the financial support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Brilliant presentation, very clear. Can I pass it on to the floor for questions, please, or comments? We've got a good 5 minutes. Please just unmute yourselves and ask your question. I see some raised hands. Let me see if the people put any. Who is raising their hand?
I am.
Okay, can you please ask your question?
How and what will be the technology to make the nanobubbles?
That's a good question. And we have a number of choice. And currently we have a pressurized system. Basically, you have the combined liquids with both liquid fuels as well as the gaseous fuels. You compress the liquid and then you release the pressure. It's like you open up a Coke, you will be able to see the bubbles coming out. But if you repeat the process, you will produce nano-sized bubbles in the liquid, but you can't see it. Maybe you will find it if you measure the Coke.
Have you tried it?
Have you
tried it?
Yeah, we tried it.
Yes. All right. All right. Then the second question is, by adding these nanobubbles to the fuel, you're changing the octane number.
That's a good question. Potentially, yes, because we add hydrogen and we will have a faster flame speed.
Correct.
But hydrogen has much better knock resistance. So we'll improve the knock resistance, which is a good thing to improve the efficiency.
My point was, after change the octane number,
Yeah.
will the internal combustion engines still suitable to use it?
That's another good question. That's the reason why
Thank you.
we need to do more experiments after producing the nanobubbles, which is one of the main tasks of the project. Yeah, but we have a number of choice to optimize combustion process. We can have the optimized spark ignition timing. We can have optimized the injection process. Yeah, all these methods can be used.
Yeah. All right, thank you. That's all.
So thank you
thank you very much.
As you said, very good questions. I think Salmas.
Yeah, I mean, Xinyan, thanks very much for the excellent presentation. Now, following on from the previous question, really, I was wondering whether the theory would work in using hydrogen with other fuels in burners.
Well,
For
sorry,
example, burner boiler, boilers in burners and ovens and so on. Can we use?
Yeah, it can be. The beauty of the fuel is we can make use of existing infrastructure. I think if we are talking about the boiler, maybe the ammonia hydrogen nanobubbles fuel will be more relevant, because once you for the conventional liquid fuel, I think they are more suitable for transport sector. And for the ammonia and the hydrogen, after injection, it will be gas, right? Because we need to pressurize the ammonia in order to achieve a liquid phase. But after the pressure release, the ammonia and the hydrogen blend will be gas. I think it will be suitable for boiler. Yeah, that I haven't think about too much.
No, yes, I was wondering really, because it's, yeah. Great, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Just to mention in relation to the last one, that actually the dissolution of gas in a liquid will be temperature dependent as well.
Exactly. And if you remember, I mentioned a PhD student, Hamid Reza, who is working on MD simulations. So we have a plan to understand the bubble dynamics, including the stability of the nanobubbles in liquid at different conditions. It can be pressure, because we can pressurize liquid at ambient pressure or higher, for example, 2 bar, 4 bar, and also the temperature. So that's part of the research program as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. We might have 1 minute for a quick question if anybody has any last comment to make. Okay, it remains for us to thank the speaker. Thank you very much, Dr. Wang.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation. I have a couple of more questions, but having read your proposal, I think I'll leave them for a later discussion. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll move to the next speaker, which is Chun Lai, to talk about electric vehicle systems. I think Dr. Lai is ready.
Thank you, Tassos.
Okay.
So I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay. Again, I will remind you if I have to, but about 15 minutes, and we are starting right on time. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tassos. So I hope everyone can see my screen. So good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Chung Sing Lai, or Chun. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Electronic and Electrical Engineering, and also a member of the Brunel Interdisciplinary Power Systems Research Center. So it's my pleasure to give a talk in this IEF Research Festival. So today my topic of talk is development of future electric vehicle systems. So needless to say, we understand the urgency to meet net zero emissions, and in particular, transportation accounts for a very large amount of global CO2 emissions. So in this case, it accounts for 20%. And of course, in other sectors, for example, buildings, including industry sectors, they also emit a lot of CO2 emissions. But transport alone is a very large sector in this case. And of course, there are already existing vehicles, so like trains, rail, they already use this electricity for power already. But in this case, electric vehicles still has a very large market that needs to be decarbonized, replacing existing internal combustion engine with net zero vehicles. And in this case, electric vehicles is a very good choice because electric vehicles, they uses renewable electricity, including solar photovoltaic, wind, and other low carbon or zero emission resources. So in this case, for example, taking the UK as a case study, by 2030, what the government would expect is to take the historic step towards net zero with the ban of sale of new petrol and diesel cars. So in this case, purely ICE vehicles using petrol and diesel will be banned by that time. But however, hybrid vehicles, including diesel or petrol with battery and motor, they can still be sold. But by that time, the government expects that majority of the vehicles will be battery electric vehicle or alternative low carbon emission vehicles. So just to take the vehicle into a better perspective, so the internal combustion engine vehicles, which majority of us use or own, can be shown on the left. So we can see there's a lot of components, including transmission, drive shaft, clutch, valves, differentials, etc. So myself, not a mechanical engineer, I'm sure in here there are many experts working on ICE. In the case for electric vehicles, it's a very different technology. So for example, we don't really see drive shaft, piston, transmission in this case, but we have less moving parts. So for example, it could be in 2-digit numbers as compared to 4-digit numbers for the ICE vehicle. So of course, for the electric vehicle, we mainly have the battery, which acts as the power source, and also the electric motor, which acts for converting electrical energy into mechanical energy, or the rotational force, or the torque in this case. So here we can see that in some manufacturers, they claim that it could be much cheaper to maintain with less moving parts. So in this case, the reliability can be enhanced greatly. And in some case, for example, Tesla, they mentioned infinite mile warranty for some of the parts because they are so confident. In some cases, like the motor will last for many, many years. So for the electric vehicle, as I mentioned, the battery and the motor are the key components. And of course, there are other components as well, which I will talk about more in the coming slides. But for the electric machines or motors, it has been investigated for since even the early 1800s by when it started. For example, the DC machines and the AC machines, which the DC is the direct current and AC is the alternating current. And of course, there's some names like Thomas Edison, who promoted DC, and Nikola Tesla promoted AC systems. So in this case, the machines has been very mature technology already. And of course, it's been an ongoing research area for electrical machines, making brushless machines, having better performance, efficiency, last longer. And for the battery, of course, electrochemical cells, they have also been researched in a couple of centuries before. But actually, the breakthrough of battery technology actually started in the last decade or two or so. So for example, in this case, this figure shows the cost of batteries, which, for example, even before 2010 or just over a decade ago, is still very, very expensive, talking about the capital cost to be $2,000 per kilowatt hour. But in the last couple of years, in the last few years, it's been having an exponential decrease in the capital cost. So one of the reasons is the breakthrough in the technology itself, and also the economy of scale and the maturity of the technology, which has been used in several sectors, including electric vehicles. So we can see that it's been forecasted to stabilize around already in 2020, and in moving beyond, we will definitely see the capital cost for batteries would be $500 per kilowatt hour or less in this case. So what I want to mention as a message is the machines have been very mature in technology-wise. It can be used, deployed several decades ago, but actually the key technology enabler for electric vehicle is actually the battery system itself, the cost and the technology. So it can retain better, more energy for a longer duration. This is another fact about batteries. So in this presentation, I want to share with you all about some of my ongoing projects in electric vehicle systems research. So this first project, which lasted roughly for 1 year, is about the data-driven approach for optimal distribution network operation with rapid charging infrastructure and large-scale battery. So, of course, one question people, or in this case, distribution network operators have in mind, who manages or maintains the electricity infrastructure for everyone to use, is how to accommodate this large influx of electric vehicles deployment, especially when all these EVs will be using the network's electricity for charging. So in this project, we want to develop an innovative toolkit which enables active management of distribution networks. And in this case, for the distribution networks, they can better manage the power flow, some of the technical features of the network to maintain its reasonable operation. So for example, the voltage limits, which is a very important factor for DC distribution networks. And in this case, we examine from the large-scale battery operator perspective. So for example, if we have a company who installs and maintains batteries for distribution network, how could the battery operator be able to maximize the profit, whereas to also help to maintain the network operation? So this is, as we can see, is an optimization problem for the battery operator, including to maximize the profit. So just to mention the problem in a bigger context. So for example, we have the EV charging stations on the right, which it can simultaneously charge several EVs. And of course, we want to have renewable power generations, as shown on the left. Of course, we're talking about distributed generations using wind and solar panels, which can be found abundant in several places already, even in several locations, for example, in households and in forecourt in this example. And on the bottom, this is where the battery system operator owns and maintains the large-scale battery system. And of course, the distribution network also be able to exchange electricity through the main grid as well. And the main grid or this electricity can be sold in a electricity market, or in this case, the wholesale electricity market. So we have a lot of uncertainty in this case. So for example, the wind and the solar is dependent on the natural resources. So when the sun shines, when the cloud movements, and for the wind, for example, although it can be generated throughout the day, but still it's variable or intermittent in this case. And on the right, of course, the EV charging, the demand is mainly due to the consumer's behavior. So for example, how they use the energy for charging when they work or when they decided to use a lot of electricity for long trips, etc. So again, the EV charging profile can be very different throughout the day as well. So in this case, this is the reason why we need to adopt a data-driven approach to address this specific challenge, because it's very important from the data, we convert that into information, and the information can be used for decision-making for the operator to maintain the power dispatch, and including when to buy electricity from the wholesale market when it's cheap, and when to sell this energy to the wholesale market when the price is high in the market. So we can see the power flow of the system as well as the information flow, which considers the data collection for the energy storage agent. So to address this challenge, we use reinforcement learning, which is based on a reward function which wants to maximize the profit for the large-scale battery system. So as the project is coming to the end, we have some publications already presented at conferences, as well as journal articles. So in this month, we had a paper accepted on distributed optimization model for mitigating three-phase imbalance with EVs and grid battery. So the idea is that for the distribution systems, they use this three-phase power in this case. But for EV charging, typically speaking, each EV could be using single phase. And how to maintain the three-phase balance when electric vehicles are charging using single phases, in this case, is addressed in this work. And the ongoing work, which is about the profit maximization for large-scale energy storage systems to enable fast EV charging infrastructure in distribution networks. So this is mainly, as I mentioned, using the reinforcement learning technique into maximizing the battery operator's profit based on several uncertainties using a data-driven approach. So this second project, which is a collaboration with partners from Indian universities, as well as the government, is about the electrification of public transport and intermediate public transport in Indian cities. So in India, they also, of course, have a very high interest in decarbonization in transport. And one of the interesting points about India is a lot of citizens, they rely on intermediate public transports. So for example, using three-wheeler articles, two-wheeler articles, vehicles, three-wheeler vehicles, two-wheeler vehicles. So they actually use this for charging as well, for transportation. So in this project, we aim to develop a strategy and action plan for the electrification of public transport and intermediate public transport services for the two cities, which is the Ahmedabad and Mehsana, for 2026. So for my contribution in this project is mainly on the power system analysis, and in particular looking at Ahmedabad distribution and transmission power systems, and to conduct power flow analysis to understand how the increase of intermittent renewables, and in this case, also the EV charging or four-wheeler charging, three-wheeler charging can impact on the Ahmedabad distribution networks. So I gave some recommendation about how to enhance or increase the deployment of such transportation, including using smart charging techniques to manage all this vehicle charging, as well as grid enhancement. So I understand the time is coming up, so I will just quickly, briefly talk about my another project, which is on UK Saudi EVs Enhanced Education and Research Network. So this is an ongoing, recently project with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and is to prepare course materials to educate and to support young graduates and researchers to address the challenges of electric vehicle technologies. Okay. So I think I will just skip this slides. So just to mention, presently I'm also supervising a couple of PhD students, as well as one MN group project related to electric vehicle systems optimization, as well as electric vehicle system drivetrain optimization. So thank you very much for your time, and so please feel free to contact me if any interest in my research. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
Tassos.
thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. I think we have a raised hand from Mohammed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Chun, for the excellent presentation. Just two quick questions. The large-scale battery system, is this special batteries, or is it the second life of electric vehicle batteries?
Thank you, Mohammed. So at the moment, we just consider it as a base case lithium-ion, just a standard battery. So it's not a second life or alternative energy storage. But I think your question is very relevant and very good, because to be honest, I'm not very fond of using battery for grid scale storage because they degrade very quickly, as well as they're really expensive. So in the market, there are also several different kinds of energy storage, stationary energy storage available, like thermal energy storage. And in my postdoctoral research, I also investigated the economics of thermal energy storage, which is very beneficial as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. A second quick question. You did mention about the imbalance because of the single phase chargers for the batteries there. But the single phase, this is only for domestic, but for the chargers in the sort of stations, there are three phase. So there is no problem with the unbalanced system there, you know, for most of the faster chargers.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. So this is more of a research idea. So again, I mean, in the future, we don't rule out, I mean, fast charging would be happening at home. And yeah, so again, we expect in the future, we talking about even a lot of high power charging infrastructure to be built specifically for residential area as well.
Thank you very much, Chun. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
I think Atanas has a raised hand. So Atanas.
Yes, me again, sorry. Just out of interest, why Tesla is still using AC motors, not DC motors? In order to convert, you have a DC, you have a battery. In order to convert it to AC, you have a heavy device. I have two at home. They're bloody heavy and useless. Okay, on the top of that has to have the proper electronics to, how to say, to give the efficiency of more. Why are they doing this?
Yes, thank you, Atanas. So in the market at the moment, there's different kinds of AC and DC machines in use. So the most relevant AC machines is induction machines, as well as synchronous AC machines. So one of the reasons why AC machines is used, because they, typically speaking, have a higher power rating, because it can be operated as a three-phase machine in many cases. Whereas for the DC machine, they typically don't have like a much higher or higher power rating as AC machines. And now for the DC machines, one of the reasons in the old age is the commutators, which can wear out, can be an issue. But I mean, DC machines is actually increasing. They're developing brushless machines as well.
Yeah, but still the trumps and all the rest are on DC machines.
Yeah, so I think
because they have enormously high torque to start.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the vehicle type. So for example, Nissan, they use DC machines like the Nissan Leaf, but for Tesla, they use like the AC machine. So I think it depends on the markets as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Atanas.
Okay, I think we are just on time. So unless there is a quick question, Maybe I will mention a comment for the experts. You have included the ships in your slides, the marine transport, but these are very big engines. These are engines in megawatt capacities. So do we see electrification going towards the ship industry?
Tassos, is this a question for me?
Yeah, the question for you is how big would the engine be? What sort of size engines will we be able to build? Cars, it seems that we are on the way, but for much bigger engines like
I see.
a ship, and you have been using ships in your schematics.
Sorry, I think there was a misunderstanding. You mean this figure or?
No. As part of your of the electrification,
yeah,
ships were also mentioned, which are very big engines.
Yeah. So I think it's. I mean, there's already electrical motors or machines already in ships working with, I mean, combustion engine. But I haven't really investigated the ships or the sea sector yet. Yeah. So I think we can have a discussion with the.
Yeah, it's a big question because the UK gets 90% of its food coming into the country from the marine industry. Okay, but we can leave that discussion for the big engines a bit later on. Okay. Again, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. We are all learning quite a lot from all of this. Thank you again. It's my pleasure now to go to the third lecture, which will be given by Salman, Masoudi, Soltani. Salman is there already, and Salman has been working on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. He's got a team of about 5 or 6 people, I believe. So, Salman, over to you to give us your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tassos, for the introduction and the opportunity. Right, so if you don't mind, I'll have to basically stop my camera because I don't know, for some reason it is playing up on my end a little bit. And if you can tell me whether you can actually see my screen, that would be great.
Yeah, we can. So please go ahead.
So if you bear with me 1 second. Excellent. Okay. Right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the presentation, during which I'll basically briefly give an overview of carbon capture, utilization, and storage processes, as well as associated current and future challenges involved in this technology. So I will kick start this presentation by providing an outlook on the current status of carbon emissions and hence the importance of carbon capture. I will then walk you through the technologies associated with CCS and the general challenges involved, with a focus on post-combustion CCS. My presentation will then basically conclude with a taste of my group's research around the application of biomass combustion residue in post-combustion carbon capture. Now let's talk about the why a little bit. So why is it really important? So as we all know, it is evident that the atmospheric concentration of CO2 has been sharply on the rise within the past decades. Now it's currently standing at about 410 ppm. As it can be seen here, there has been a clear soaring rise in carbon concentration just within this and the previous century. Now, this increased atmospheric CO2 concentration will give rise to global temperatures, which will bring about catastrophic side effects as a result of climate change. As a result, it has been internationally agreed to limit the increase in global temperature to less than 2 degrees C, as we all know. But unfortunately, with business as usual, an increase of 6 degrees C appears to be well within reach, which would render an extensive geological regions uninhabitable. Now, there has been a significant increase in global carbon emissions with a fairly steep projected rise within just the next few decades. Most of these carbon emissions, however, originate from transportation, industry, and power sectors, as you can see here, with other sectors generally contributing to smaller shares of such emissions. Here you can see the share of power and processed CO2 across the US, for instance, implying that the two are in fact competitive sources of atmospheric carbon emissions, with unsurprisingly, fairly similar distribution, with the Midwest and Gulf regions realized to be the major emitters in the country. Now, having this said, the quality of such carbon emissions is highly industry dependent, as seen here. So it ranges from 3 to 4% to near pure CO2, depending on the process involved. This will in turn dictate the difficulty of separation and challenges involved in terms of energy consumption and hence the total process expenditures. Now, to elaborate further on this, the variation in CO2 concentration in given flue gas is linked to the amount of theoretical work required for the corresponding separation, as you can see on this graph. So in short, the higher the concentration of CO2 in the gas, the less work is needed for a given separation. Now, to give an example here, one would need, for instance, less energy to decarbonize an IGCC than to remove carbon from atmospheric air. Now, this slide shows the carbon emissions have been on the rise in 2021 across the most polluting nations around the world. The continued and in some cases the increase in coal-based energy has been another contributor to this observed increase. Overall, the message here is that although we are moving towards a fossil fuel-free world, there is still quite a few steps to take in order to get there in our lifetime. Now, as reported just recently, climate impacts have sadly led to a considerable loss of lives around the world and imposing huge economic costs. Now, based on this, in December 2020, the UK announced its ambitious 10-point plan to meet net zero emissions by 2050, which was previously set at 80%. This will then bring about a significant economic boost to the nation. Now, interestingly enough, the 8th point in the plan is directly linked to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, with significant funding to support industry and create new job opportunities across the country. Even better, early last year, the UK announced its industrial decarbonization strategy, which is a little bit different from the power sector. And this aims to generate 20 terawatt-hour per year of low-carbon power in industry by the end of this decade, while capturing 3 million tons of CO2 per year. So this is quite a significant amount. So all this shows the extent of urgency and commitment for the deployment of CCS technology in the UK. Now, we can also see that 2 major CCS clusters have been just given the green light for deployment, and this would simply give access to about 41 projects to basically utilize and exploit these facilities. And biomass combustion with carbon capture and direct air capture have also under development for deployment by the end of this year in smaller scales, obviously. Now, if we want to have a UK perspective and the current political climate in the world, we can see that the current war that is going in Ukraine, it's led to a significant rise in gas prices. Now, this has now brought about a high degree of uncertainty in regards to the future economy and may well impact the funding allocation and decisions for CCS as a whole by the Treasury in the UK. Now, the message here is that if we want to, if we want this to go ahead, we have to come up with blue sky thinking and making sure that we're able to have some sort of radical thinking to make sure CCS projects would take off just in time. Now, a little bit on the what and how with regards to CCUS. So let's see what CCS is. So CCS simply refers to a collective set of technologies that comprise capturing CO2 and then either using it to produce other value-added products or basically permanently storing it on the ground. And CCS is typically classified into post-combustion capture, pre-combustion capture, and oxy-fuel combustion, depending on the way carbon is captured in the process. Post-combustion carbon capture, which is the topic of this presentation today, involves capturing CO2 at its emission point, such as power plants, flue gases, and industrial processes such as hydrogen production. I will now expand further on post-combustion carbon capture within the next coming slides. Now, here you can see 3 of the processes employed in post-combustion CCS. Each technology basically comes with a set of pros and cons. However, what absorption processes, that is using liquid solvent to remove CO2, are fair to say the most conventional. Adsorption technologies with a D using solid sorbents instead of liquid solvents are becoming more and more important and are basically now known to be the second generation of capture technologies, which are to be heavily deployed within this decade. Besides the strong political incentive and operating challenges of capture plants, the key barrier to widespread deployment of CCS here is the relatively high cost, as with any other technologies, really. Now, as I stated earlier, high capital and operating expenditures are the main barriers for the deployment of the capture technology at a scale at the moment. However, we have to bear in mind that as with any other technology, the associated costs would initially go through a rising phase, after which they begin to fall. Once the first of a kind process is commercialized, then these costs basically will begin to come down or become more economically viable. Now, the good news is that there are currently 65 CCS plants across the globe in various stages of development, from research and pilot all the way up to demonstration and commercial scales. Also, there is a clear increase in the number of new capture plants around the world, as you can see here on this slide. Now, I want to talk a little bit about absorption and adsorption processes, which are the most commonly practiced processes in the industry at the moment. Now, in absorption CCS, a solvent is typically used to remove CO2, and this solvent can be typically amines, for instance. Now, the flue gas stream is normally brought in contact with the solvent in an absorber column, which you can see here on this slide. The CO2-free gas from the top of the absorber then goes through a water wash section before being released into the atmosphere. The rich solvent is then pumped to the regeneration column, which is here on the right, where it is heated in a reboiler to break down the chemical bonds between the solvent and CO2. The high purity CO2 stream is then claimed from the top of the stripper and is compressed for transport. Now, there are several research gaps in this area, which for most part would require further improvement. And the first one that you can see here at the top of this slide is basically the most challenging issue, which is the energy consumption of the reboiler in the stripper. Now, this is obviously the main challenge associated with absorption-based carbon capture technologies. Now, in adsorption processes, we're basically using a solid sorbents to capture CO2. Now, the saturated adsorbent is then regenerated typically by swinging the temperature or pressure in a parallel column or the same column. So on the left here, a two-column adsorption-desorption unit is shown. Now, the regeneration of adsorption is normally done by changing the temperature or pressure of the column, hence the temperature or pressure swing. In more complex processes, a combination of these technologies have been employed to improve the overall efficiency of the process. You can see here on this slide, such as vacuum swing adsorption, rapid temperature swing adsorption, pressure temperature swing adsorption, and so on and so forth. Now, there has been a number of studies which have investigated various configuration in adsorption CCS in order to improve the process efficiency. So apart from the adsorbent material itself, there are also a lot of research going on around the process scheduling and the configuration of the process itself. Now, 3, 4, 5, and 6 column processes, as you can see here, with different scheduling schemes, are examples of such advanced process developments. Now, in principle, what happens is a step-by-step process development in adsorption CCS can begin by developing a new adsorbent material and then tailor-making existing adsorbents for a specific CO2 separation, depending on the properties of the inlet gas. Now, the next step, obviously, is to prove the proof of concept. We study the equilibrium, kinetic, and heat adsorption studies, mass transfer studies, and then we conduct feasibility studies, which will then lead to a good understanding of the viability of the process itself. Now, this would then continue and then move into the feeder studies, and then finally, commercial or industrial scale sort of operation. Now, some of the large-scale adsorption CCS facilities are seen on this slide. In addition to these, there are currently a number of other operational units across the world, and many more under research and development as of today. Again, these are some of the challenges that are associated with adsorption processes. Again, the adsorption capacity, the kinetic and equilibrium capacities, the adsorbent itself, its thermal and mechanical stability in the process, selectivity, and the energy consumption for regeneration. These are some of the very important challenges that we are basically facing at the moment. In terms of more recent research directions, there seems to be an increasing interest in integrating artificial intelligence with CCS in order to improve the process efficiencies. Now, this is typically done by generating data and then using the data to develop and train an ANN or an artificial neural network. The developed ANN would then be able to predict the behavior of the process and ultimately, pinpointing the optimum separating conditions for a specific separation. Now, there has been also an increasing interest in the employment of solar energy in the regeneration of sorbents. And here is where the research that we do here in Cambridge would, meet with some of the research that is going on in mechanical engineering, for instance. Now, this renewable energy can be integrated with a circulatory boiler in case of absorption CCS or with a desorption column in case of adsorption CCS. So such examples are depicted here again on this slide. All right, now I want to move on and talk a little bit about biomass energy with carbon capture, which is a roadmap to negative emission. This is a little bit of one part of the research that I do in my research group, as well as an important aspect in meeting net zero emissions by the end of within the first half of this century. Now, the combustion of sustainable biomass is a net zero emission process. Now, this is because during the combustion of biomass, only the CO2 that was previously removed from the atmosphere during the plant's growth is put back into the atmosphere. Now, however, if this CO2 is further captured, i.e. BECCS, we will be looking at a negative emission process, which combines biomass combustion and post-combustion carbon capture technologies. Now, NET, including BECCS, have been identified to be an inseparable part of a roadmap to meet the climate change targets as seen on this graph. By 2100, negative emissions would need to exceed the remaining emissions. This translates into a net reduction in atmospheric CO2 by the end of the century. Now, this is illustrated on this graph with the assumption that the negative emission technologies are deployed at a scale towards the end of this decade. Now, so what has been done around BECCS in the context of negative emissions in the UK? And around the globe, really. Now, there are only a few commercial scale BECCS plants in the world, with many more to be built in the years to come. And Drax, the largest power plant in the UK and traditionally a coal-fired power plant, is now the world's largest biomass-fired thermal power plant. This means that Drax is now well on track to achieve net zero emissions. Now, the biomass storage
Salman, we are in the last 2 or 3 minutes, yeah?
Sure. So the biomass storage domes here at Drax is shown here on this slide. Now, I just walked through this very quickly. Now, this is the CCS plant that is being trialed at Drax. Now, moving on to the last part of my presentation, which is my research around BECCS. Again, this is a schematic of a power plant. You can see some of the solid residues that are basically produced at the plant. And what we have thought about is basically to use this material that is being produced on site and exploit this material to produce some value-added materials or adsorbents in this case. Now, we managed to basically use fly ash and bottom ash generated at Drax to produce 2 different types of adsorbents material to capture CO2. Some of the properties here, and then here you can see the capture capacity or the optic capacity of these materials, which is very good compared to the commercial grade activated carbon or other adsorbent material in industry. This is an absorption rig that we've built in our group as a part of a funded project and the work of one of my PhD students, Ben Petrovic. And then here you can see the work that Ben has basically successfully completed in my research group. These are some of the steps that we take normally in order to evaluate the efficiency of the adsorption process for one specific separation. Now, the core research in my group basically comprises post-combustion carbon capture, combined hydrogen production and CO2 capture, seawater decarbonization, and also the removal of micropollutants from marine environment. Now, here are some of the projects that are funded in my group, and then a brief overview of these things. So mostly these are funded by EPSRC or BASE. The most interesting one here, probably for the sake of this presentation, is project number 2, which has just been funded. And here we are basically building we're designing and building a pilot plant which is able to capture 100 tons of CO2 per year. in wave mass UK. So this is the first of a kind in the UK and pretty much anywhere in the world. And we hope that this would be an interesting project and its realm of research. Now, some of the other research that basically conduct are some consultancy works with Defense Ministry around CO2 capture again, some of the published work, and finally, I would like to thank the group members in my research group who have whose contribution has been invaluable, and we wouldn't be here if these people did not exist. I would also like to thank Dr. Svetlana Ignatova and yourself, Tassos, very much for your continual support of my research. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I didn't overshoot the time.
No, that's very good, Salman. Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to support research which has grown substantially over the last 2 or 3 years. So well done to all the group, yourself and all the group. We can maybe have time for 1 or 2 quick questions if the audience has a question.
Shall I try again?
Sorry. I think
all right.
Something.
Just question about that. Trying to hide the CO2, does it look like a bit sweeping the rubbish under the carpet? Later, somebody else to find it.
So we're basically capturing CO2 atoms, and then so it pretty much depends on what you want to really do with that CO2. If you're basically storing underground in geological formation, you're not basically ignoring the problem, because storing CO2 underground is pretty safe, and it can stay there for hundreds or thousands of years. And you're absolutely correct in saying that it is not basically it's going to be creating some additional problem in the future in hundreds or thousands of years to come. But climate change emergency at the moment, and urgency at the moment to be addressed is quite, far more important, I believe, if you see what I mean.
All right, thank you. I was thinking the same way.
Thank you.
Savas, you might want to unmute yourself.
Okay, Salman, thanks for the presentation. I mean, my question is quite general, really. I wanted to find out whether biomass power sort of generation is increasing in the UK, or what is the outlook?
So the biomass is actually biomass combustion is going to increase in the years to come, Savas. The reason is that biomass is an inseparable part of our roadmap to negative emission. Negative emission by IPCC, which is environmental panel on climate change. They've said that biomass combustion must increase if we want to meet these climate change targets. We have to basically have biomass combustion or add this to our energy mix. So that is certainly going to increase. You can see that Drax, within just the past 5-6 years, they've had 6 boilers, and then they've converted basically all of them to biomass combustion. So this is a significant shift from coal burning to biomass burning, and it is expected to rise both in the UK and globally.
Right. Okay. No,
Thank you very much, Savas and Salman. I think we would like to thank the speaker again for an excellent presentation, and I'm hoping that we'll have another opportunity to hear a bit more about the projects as they developed, since we have a lot of projects in that group. Thank you again, Salman.
Thank you very much, Tassos, Savas. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. So it's time now to move to Ahmed Zobaa, who's getting ready there with his presentation on the electrical energy storage in future grids. So Ahmed, could you please start? Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And this is just a brief idea about one of the strategic area of research in Brunel Interdisciplinary Power System Research Center. So my talk today is related to electrical energy storage in future grids, and mainly for the electricity grid. So more electrical power engineering in this presentation. As an introduction, energy storage is essential to balance supply and demand at short notice, so it will play a key role in enabling the world to develop a low-carbon electricity systems. There are 2 drivers which let us start researching in this area for years. The first one, accelerating development of renewable energy projects. And the second driver is the effect that solar power has on demand for utility electricity.
There were too many slides, so I was saying you. But yeah.
Can people mute themselves, please?
There is one, yeah. So after these two drivers, I will present very briefly the two major research areas we are working on in BEPS, which are as the future rules of energy storage and the very important term nowadays, which is called hosting capacity. So the first driver, which is accelerating development of renewable energy projects. All we see what is happening for renewable energy and the increasing in the level of penetration of renewable energy in worldwide. And we can see on this slide that change in electricity demand in 2020 and 2021 by region. Very high increase in demand, as well as very high increase in renewable electricity generation in 2020-2021. We can see how it looks like, and we can see that China is leading more green energy to be generated from different technologies, including hydro, solar PV, wind, bioenergy, and other renewable energy. We can see, according to the expectations of the International Energy Association, that there is an expected to average around 305 gigawatt per year between 2021 and 2026, according to the main case forecast. As we may some know that there are three cases which IEA considering: main case, accelerated case, and net zero scenario. So the care should be taken in the transition into 100% renewable-based systems. We all hear nowadays that we are looking forward to have 100% renewable energy system, which is not easy to reach to this target, except we take into considerations some of what will be presented in this presentation. The second driver for our research is the effect that solar power has on demand for utility electricity. And the very interesting story, which gives you idea for general audience about this, the short story is called duck curve. And the term was coined in 2012 by California Independent System Operator. What was happened? All of the utilities worldwide would like to see the camel, as you can see. The load curve of any utility should be camel. And this is the normal behavior of the electricity worldwide. But with the increase of photovoltaic, and mainly in California in 2013, we start to see that the load curve started to be converted from camel to be a duck. And if you Googled, you can see the duck curve, which is now increased on the internet due to the massive increase in the installation of solar energy. If we focus on one of the days during 2016, and this is especially on 22nd of October, we can see the clear duck curve. And we can see in blue the demand, and in light brown, which is a solar generation in gray. So the problem comes from the duck curve. We can see it in between 5 and 6 p.m. when the sunset starts, and this requires some 5 gigawatt of generating capacity from non-renewable sources to come online within 1 hour, which is very hard for any utility to support. Plus this, we can see 3 major problems from the duck curve, including steep toll ramps, overgeneration and curtailment, and finally, frequency responses. To flatten the duck curve, there are two major solutions. We are working on them. The internal connections between the countries can support the massive increase in the solar generation and the energy storage, which is the focus of my presentation today. So to conclude, higher levels of energy storage are required for coping with the increasing use of intermittent wind and solar electricity. Plus, we need grid flexibility as well as grid stability. So there are two questions must be answered. What are the future rules of electrical energy storage? And what are the minimum maximum limits of the hosted renewable energy in any grid? And this is what is called hosting capacity. Regarding the energy storage, we all know about the different technologies of the energy storage, and I'm concentrating on the electrical energy storage. We have chemical form, we have mechanical form, we have electrical form, different technologies, as you can see on the right-hand side, are available in the market, but till now there are many. We haven't used them at the grid scale of the electricity grid. Comparing all of these technologies together, we can see that higher the power and energy density, which are while reaching the top right corner of this curve, we can see we need lower volume of the storage. And this is very clearly when you can see the capacitors there, because capacitors needs volume lower than any other technology. But while going to lower energy density, lower power density, while reaching the top, the bottom left corner of this graph, we can see we need huge volume. And this is really clearly by seeing the battery there. Talking about how many time we need, because we have major problem in our electricity grids that we don't have technology supporting longer time of storage. So these graphs gives us idea about how many or for how long we can store our electricity. So if we are talking seconds to minutes, we can see that the double layer capacitors, which are super capacitors, super magnetic energy storage, and the flywheel energy storage can support this period of time. If we are talking between minutes and hours, so we can see flywheel energy storage, lead acid batteries, lithium ion batteries, and sodium sulfur batteries are supporting this area. And here we go. This is our problem now, that we need to store the electricity days to months. And we have two emerging technologies which are promising for the future energy storage, which are hydrogen and synthetic natural gas. We have different applications for the energy storage, so we are working on the power scale applications, and we can see that not all the technologies can work here. So we have compressed air energy storage and the pumped hydro energy storage are geographically limited, which means that not every country in the world can install pumped hydro storage. And from the electrical energy point of view, pumped hydro storage is the gorilla of energy storage. We have 120 gigawatt installed in the worldwide electricity grids. From the other point of view, talking economically, we can see that using the battery are still expensive. And at the same time, if we are talking about compressed air energy storage above ground technology, it is still expensive. Also, we are working on the time scale applications, and under this category, we have two subcategories. Energy applications, while talking about longer time scale and the longer amount of energy. And working on the power applications when we are working for shorter time scale, real-time control of the grids. And here we can see the different surfaces which the energy storage can support for the energy applications and power applications. The current and the future trends in applications, we see that we have renewable energy generations and using decentralized storage system for increased self-consumption of PV energy. And we can see Germany is leading this by installing many hundreds of kilowatt photovoltaic in each home in Germany. So these are supporting the grid as well as making deferring for many things for the utility future plans. We have smart grids, and this is what we are looking forward to have in the future. Smarter grids will become more active and will have to accommodate bi-directional power flow. And this is the problem which increased from the traditional electricity grids, because we had only one flow from the generation to the consumer. But nowadays, and while installing more renewable energy at the different level of the electricity grids, we start to have bi-directional flow. We have smart microgrids, and simply speaking, microgrid is part of the big grid, which is the smart grid. So this is one of the current and the future applications as well. Smart houses, which is proposed in order to use energy more efficiently, economically, and reliably in residential area. And we have electrical vehicle. I will not spend time here because it was covered in the previous presentations, but we have future trends which include vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to grid, and vehicle to home. There are 6 market needs for the energy storage: need for lowering energy cost, need for flexible supply, need for continuous supply, need for avoiding congestion in power grids, need for mobile applications, need for future low carbon energy systems. And here you can see how it looks like the future rules of energy storage while installing them at the different level of the grid, starting from the generation to the transmission level, to the distribution level, or to the consumer level. And here just a schematic diagram give you idea how we can install the batteries, the vehicles, or different technologies of the energy storage among the grid. This is the future rules, but according to the time, I am trying to be a bit fast to cope with the time and put us on track again. Finally, the hosting capacity, and this is one of the areas of research nowadays. What is meant by hosting capacity? This is the amount of the distributed generation power integrated into system, which is a system performance becomes unacceptable. So every grid in the grid is limited with certain amount of hosted renewable energy. But we have different techniques which we can use in any grid in the world to increase the limit. As you can see, we moved the limit of the hosted renewable energy from the red point into the green point. And working on the different limits which limiting the hosting capacity, including over voltage, thermal overloading, power quality, which is my major area of expertise, and finally the protection. Just to conclude my presentation, the next generations of the smart grid without energy storage is like a computer without a hard drive, severely limited. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ahmed. Excellent presentation. We running only 5 minutes late generally, so we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody wants to pose a question, please unmute yourselves and go right ahead.
I tried to be a bit fast just to come on time.
Yeah. Salman, could you?
Hi, Ahmed, thanks so much for the interesting sort of review of energy storage. I mean, the question I have is that you mentioned that really there are two emerging sort of technologies, the hydrogen and SNG. Yeah, I mean, on the SNG side, can you tell us a bit more about it? I mean, is it completely decarbonized?
Really, I am not expert. I am working on the hydrogen side, not the synthetic natural gas. But yeah, it is carbonized. It is a green gas as well, like the hydrogen. But till now, they are emerging because, as we can see for the hydrogen, we have a problem. We are generating the hydrogen offshore, but till now we don't have 100%, technology to support the gigawatts of hour of energy to be transformed into onshore, to store and to regenerate it using fuel cells again.
Okay, thank you.
But I don't have full information really about synthetic natural gas. It's out of my area of expertise. Sorry for this.
Thank you.
Okay, Mohammed, last question for you.
Yes, quick question. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for the excellent presentation. A quick question. Do you think we can reach 100% renewable technically, or do we still need at least 1% like coming from the grid from, conventional sources to synchronize things?
Okay. Regarding 100% renewable energy, yes, we can do it because now we have the techniques which can enhance the hosting capacity, and if the grid is ready, you can host 100%. There is a very interesting study online. Stanford University did it, that they studied how to support, to generate 100% renewable energy to supply the world with electricity in 2030 from three things: water, wind, and solar. So, and they studied and get the levelized cost of energy for this study. So it is visible now that we can reach 100% renewable energy. But again, from the grid side, we have many technical constraints. We are losing the inertia in the electricity grid, but you can see, Mohammed, there are different areas now of research. They are working how to create dummy inertia, how we can let the grid know that there is an inertia, but it is already dummy, not coming from the traditional generation and the synchronous generators as well.
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Just for the information, currently the energy coming worldwide from renewables is about 20%. So you can see that we have a lot of research ahead of us, not only to generate the energy from renewables to reach the 100% that Ahmed is talking about, but also to get the grid ready, get the systems ready to actually accommodate that. So I think the research is going both ways. First, to increase the energy provision, and secondly, to actually be able to use it once we generate it. I think Ahmed mentioned hydrogen, so I'd like to thank you very much, Ahmed, and move now to our next speaker. Thank you for an excellent presentation, Ahmed. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to move now to hydrogen, as already mentioned by Ahmed, and the next speaker is Zahir Dehouche, who's getting ready, and he's going to talk about hydrogen and his work that he's been doing with his team. So Zahir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tassos. Can you just confirm that you can see my slide?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I will. Thanks also for Ahmed for introducing all the importance of the use of energy storage, to balance renewables. I will be talking mostly on regenerative hydrogen fuel cell energy storage technology we are now trying to implement through the VPP for Island project, European project, in specific islands in Europe. mostly on lead islands, in Spain and Turkey. Yeah, I will present the concept, the hybrid concept that includes both battery, lithium-ion battery, and the regenerative hydrogen fuel cell energy storage. And there is a very interesting synergy between these two energy storage devices in terms of increasing the energy stored on investment, or what we call in general the energy payback. Yes, I want first to introduce the VPP project and then move more on technical aspects of the component of a regenerative hydrogen fuel cell system, mostly how hydrogen is stored actually physically. And we are proposing in the project to store it for safety aspects, to store it in a solid form using these nanostructured materials. They have a relatively good reversibility, and actually also talk about the green hydrogen, how hydrogen is produced. And the system, the regenerative hydrogen storage system, produce hydrogen during excess periods, during the periods when renewables are high and the loads are at low level. We produce hydrogen and then store it, reuse that hydrogen as a vector, to generate electricity back from a fuel cell to feed or to balance renewables. Yes, and I will also show some other projects we worked on a large scale, with a large scale capacity of hydrogen for decarbonization of the electricity. Yeah, the waste to energy project. This is also hydrogen related, transforming urban waste into green electricity, low carbon electricity. And the use also of hydrogen as a feedstock, as an element to increase, the capacity of a bioreactor, their capacity on producing, the biomethane, mostly increase the concentration of methane in the biogas. Okay. Yeah, the background of the VPP project. VPP is European funded. VPP has, it's an aggregate of energy systems, and the VPP control system determines the logic of the energy dispatch. In terms, the key performance indicators are low carbon. We want always to favorize or to dispatch energy that has, a carbon embedded as relatively low. Still, these islands use conventional energy systems. That means the electricity used, it's still high carbon, the islands. Still fossil fuel based energy systems, electricity systems are, covering a big, portion of the electricity used in those islands. And the idea is, of course, they have already some renewable capacities in the system, but of course these renewables, either wind or solar PV, run, at high capacity during the sun's peak hours or during high wind periods. But during the periods when it's low, then the island relies on a sea cable or on local, decentralized fossil fuel-based generators. The objective of the VPP is to see how we can introduce energy storage system to increase the load factor linked to the green electricity that is dispatched actually in these islands, and increase, of course, the energy security, and reduce, of course, the carbon impact, or decarbonize that impact. Of course, we analyze not just the carbon impact, but also we need to be sure that we are dispatching low-cost electricity there, and increase, of course, reliability there. And we, the VPP system has also controls on loads to determine mostly during the peak hours to reduce the the charge on the energy systems. Yes. Yeah, we are using a hybrid system, a hybrid system based on fuel cell and batteries. When you combine these systems, there is actually a lot of synergy there. This allows us to increase that energy stored on investment, which is the energy payback. But we need to be careful about the, how actually that energy is dispatched. Means determine exactly the logic of that energy dispatch. When battery is actually used, when we combine both fuel cell and battery for electricity supply, or when to prioritize renewable. These islands, they have already a certain capacity. Some of the selected buildings, they have already solar PV capacities, but without storage. The idea is, of course, to fully decarbonize these buildings using a synergy logic between batteries and fuel cell. But hydrogen needs to be produced. That's why our system can locally produce hydrogen using excess of electricity produced from renewable. It's a green hydrogen. Of course, we are putting into the electrolyzer a green electricity. Hydrogen is stored. What we are proposing in the system is to store it for safety aspects, to store it using solid structures, metal hydrides. They can operate at relatively low pressure, Some metal hydrides, mostly magnesium-based metal hydrides, can absorb. We can actually be charged at around 10 bar, which is the electrolyzers produce hydrogen around, the PEM electrolyzers around 15 bars or atmospheres. That means we don't need really to compress hydrogen at the exit of the electrolyzer. There is no energy input there. Because this tends to reduce, of course, the energy stored on investment because it's parasitic loss there. Yes, solid storage is also for safety aspects because the reaction is endothermic when hydrogen is extracted. When hydrogen feeds the fuel cell, is actually the temperature of the bed is not rising, is actually reaction isothermic, and we can use some energy, some of thermal energy produced by the fuel cell. We can actually, use that thermal energy and sustain or stabilize the flow rate of hydrogen required for the load. Yeah, the only inconvenience here is we can only operate the fuel cell on base load aspects, because when we start to do dynamics, the dynamics are done mostly with battery. Battery is best to respond to dynamics, but fuel cell is there mostly for base loads. Yes, what we do, of course, ourselves, we measure the behavior of the fuel cell and different load configurations and determine exactly the impedance losses there in the system. We determine it's mostly voltage losses. There is 3 sources of voltage losses, and we try to operate, of course, the fuel cell by minimizing those losses there. Okay, we use nanostructured materials for it's mostly for kinetics aspects, for the transition of hydrogen from a gaseous form into solid form. And nanostructured means high surface area. You increase the surface area for the transition of hydrogen. And it's relatively fast there. And also this, by the way, these hosts, these metallic hosts that host hydrogen, needs catalyst for the discharge aspects. needs that transition metals. We work on alloyed catalysts that have high dehydrogenation properties, to discharge hydrogen at relatively low temperature and stabilize the desorption flow rate. This is the configuration of one of the islands for Montera in Spain. We already identified some buildings where we want to implement this smart VPP community energy system. Of course, relatively, we use renewables. We prioritize, of course, renewable because it's the lowest carbon in the system. There is still some carbon embedded in silicon-based single junction PV systems, but they are the lowest in the system. Now, when electricity comes out from the fuel cell or battery, there is always some embedded carbon there, and we try, of course, always to prioritize renewables. And when renewables is not able, of course, to satisfy that load, the balancing comes, of course, from the battery and fuel cell. Battery fuel cell, they have relatively the same carbon embedded in this technology. During the high generation periods from renewables, when the load is relatively low, then the excess of energy is stored either as in the battery, because we also prioritize battery on the fuel cell, because battery operates at high efficiency compared to the round-trip efficiency of a regenerative hydrogen fuel cell system, around 50%, where battery more than 95% Coulomb efficiency. During the high generation period for renewables and low loads, then we store energy. And then during the periods when renewables outside the peak hours, the sun's peak hours, if it's solar energy, or outside, relatively low average wind speeds, then energy is balanced, by the storage system. Storage system provides that balance, but tend to increase, of course, the carbon footprint. And we analyze that over a 1 year period. We see exactly the amount of energy dispatched from renewable and the amount of energy that is extracted from the storage system. This allows us to determine exactly the extent of the carbon, associated to the electricity dispatched at that moment. Remember, both batteries and fuel cell are electrochemical devices. Means thermodynamically there is some irreversibilities there that tend, of course, to reduce their performance. The first one is, of course, on the electrodes. We have some ohmic losses there on the electrodes, but also we have some mass transfer in the membrane itself, because in the anode where we split the molecule of hydrogen, we produce protons. Electrons are extracted or sent outside, of course, to perform their electrical work. The membrane allow, of course, the proton to transit from the anode to the cathode. It's a proton exchange membrane. The membrane is dielectric, cannot allow electrons to go through. And then in the anode side, we have the recombination between the electrons and the protons and the oxygen to produce the hot water there. There is some irreversibilities, of course, that tend to reduce the performance of this system. The peak efficiency of PEM fuel cell is around 50%. Now we need to implement this logic with a specific load, and demonstrate actually.
We are in the last few minutes here.
Really? Okay. Yes, we need, of course, to demonstrate that we are decarbonizing that selected buildings, and also reducing actually the cost of electricity or the levelized cost of electricity generated locally, that decentralized electricity system. Yeah, we can see the configuration there, the four identified buildings there. They have specifically different, they are different end users, that means they consume electricity in relatively different way. They are all prosumers. That means they have a photovoltaic facility in the building to generate electricity. And as I mentioned, we use that excess of electricity to build that storage, both on electricity for battery, but also through hydrogen for fuel cell to reproduce that electricity. Yeah, as I mentioned, combining these two elements allow us to have relatively high round-trip efficiency. Increasing the round-trip efficiency of the system tend, of course, to improve the carbon footprint of the electricity dispatch, but also reduce that levelized cost of electricity dispatch. Yeah, we demonstrate for these specific buildings that we can reduce the emissions by close to 60%. And the levelized cost compared to the grid electricity, of course, which is at relatively high cost in these islands, by 40, 50, close to 50% there. Yeah, for more information, this can be found we published these results in a proceeding of this conference, Evolving Cities, was held, I think, last September. It was, yes, last September in UK. Yeah, in the second island, the installed capacities there are not really PV. They are wind energy, which is the Turkish. They have facilities for wind electricity generation. It's around two wind turbines of 900 kilowatt capacity. This is relatively a large system where actually we can optimize the levelized cost. There we are proposing innovative technologies for like the flying wind turbine system. But the key objective here is mostly to reduce the carbon footprint or decarbonize specifically that island through increase that decarbonization through energy storage systems, but also reduce the cost. The levelized costs, actually we can also optimize the capacity with the loads. With specific loads, we can actually optimize the battery capacity to keep the levelized cost at relatively low level. But of course, the IRR also it's optimized. This is for a net value, net present value of 0.
So here, conclude if you're going to have a break.
Okay, yeah, I have a lot of other slides,
No,
but that's fine.
We need to conclude because we need to have a small break, yeah?
Yeah, thank you very much. I finished. I think it's fine.
Okay, fascinating work again. It shows the breadth of the work that we are doing in the institute and across the university. While Zahir is flipping through his slides, do we have any questions for Zahir? I can ask maybe a question when maybe some others can think about it. Zahir, you are producing electricity from buildings and then you are taking it. Can you stop flicking the slides?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the buildings. Okay.
In this particular slide, you are taking in electricity from buildings centrally and then using it back on the buildings. How does that compare with using it where you are producing it?
We use the electricity that is produced from renewables to produce, during the peak hours, the sun's peak hours, usually electricity is not used. Then the demand is relatively low. And it's the best time to produce hydrogen because when you produce hydrogen or charge your battery, you are sure you are controlling the cost of that electricity when it comes back to the system. But of course, when you put it in a battery, you are increasing the electricity cost of that, because you have still to pay for the energy storage systems. But the objective is, of course, during the off-peak periods when the renewables are at low level and when the grid electricity is at high level, the grid electricity peaks between 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And during that period, of course, energy storage can be used, to control the cost of that electricity dispatched.
Okay, I think the point is that you are giving some flexibility to the producer and
exactly
using the energy storage. Okay, I think we can allow one last question from one of our guests. So if Faisal can ask his question. There's a hand up. Okay, maybe it's not there. Okay, I think we'll take a break here, and then we will start we'll start in about 5 minutes. If you can have your coffees and get ready and get back. I must say the seminars are very well presented. We have more than 50 people attending, so I thank the speakers for this morning, and I look forward to welcoming you back in a few minutes with a lecture again on hydrogen. So please take a few minutes, get your coffees or teas or drinks, and we'll start again in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody again. I think we're ready to start for our last.
Can you see the screen, Tassos?
Yes, we can. If you can enlarge it, if you like, if you go to to slideshow, if you want. Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to start. We have 3 lectures, 3 presentations for this second part, which will take us into lunch. The first speaker is Abishek from the Department of Chemical Engineering, talking again about hydrogen, and it links with the previous work that was just presented and the one before from Ahmed, for example. So let's hear what Abishek is actually doing in his research. Abishek, over to you.
Thanks, Tassos. So in the next 15 odd minutes, what I'm going to show you is the research which is going on here in ChemEng, where we are looking into hydrogen production by electrolysis. So most of everybody knows about the carbon neutrality and things like that. So we are moving more towards getting energy from renewable resources. And when we talk about renewable resources, basically we are talking about either wind, solar, geothermal, or hydro, or also creating or developing energy from biomass pyrolysis. Now, thermodynamics first law basically says that, well, we have, you cannot create energy, but you can transform from one part to the second part. Which is perfectly fine. But then you have the second law of thermodynamics, which says, hang on a minute, you can't convert everything. So we give you the term of entropy. And the third law is basically the killer, which says you have to go down in temperature to really transform one part to the other part with a very good efficiency. So we have the killer, which is the entropy term. So although we are producing these 2 renewable resources or energy from renewable resources, we need to store them in some form or other. Now, the electricity which is there in your room or which is just powering your laptop has been created a couple of seconds ago. And that's basically the electricity which we are getting from power grids. And if you want to store them, there are only sort of couple of ways you can store this. One is by using an electrolyzer. One is energy storage, which is batteries, and the other one is using hydrogen storage. So you go through electrolyzer, and then you create hydrogen, which you can store, and then again reuse in the form of electric vehicles, which is by direct hydrogen, using hydrogen fuel cells, where you're converting it or you're reconverting it back into electricity. So basically what we are saying is you convert the renewable resources to a storage medium, either by batteries or by hydrogen. And that's basically the 2 research points where my research coincides. So in terms of energy storage, recently I've got a grant from EPSRC based on for zinc batteries. And in case of hydrogen, this is what I'm going to talk about. And soon I'll be applying for a grant based on this technology. Now, in case of hydrogen, if you look into the BEIS report, there are various ways one can produce hydrogen. This technology is already known for 50, 60 years. The various ways is usually the reforming technology, which is by steam methane reforming. You can produce hydrogen by electrolysis or by converting biomass to hydrogen directly. Now, this basically compares the various costs involved when we have different techniques. So in this case, if you look into the PEM technology, which is the polyelectrolyte membrane technology, which Zahir was talking about, we can clearly see that this technology has the highest cost. And with reforming technology, obviously the cost reduces by half. Now, if you look into this graph a bit more carefully, one can clearly see that with using the PEM technology or alkaline membrane technology, one can in principle reduce the cost and compete with the reforming technology, which is shown in this graph. But there are certain constraints which has to be used. So we have to efficiently use the renewable technology in order to reduce the cost of producing electricity, which can then be used to convert to hydrogen. So there are certain tricks which one has to do, as well as certain research which has to be used in order to improve the efficiency of the electrolysis. And that's exactly where my research comes into. How can we improve the efficiency of hydrogen production or reduce the energy requirement for hydrogen production? Now, the recent results, which I will be showing in the next couple of slides, has been patented, and therefore I cannot reveal what the additive is going to be wherein the energy consumption has reduced significantly. Now, in terms of electrolysis, when we talk in terms of electrolysis, there are three ways one can produce hydrogen. One is using an alkaline solution. The second one is when you use an acidic solution. And the third is when you use a solid oxide electrolyte or solid oxide membrane. So in this case, when you have an alkaline solution, the working temperature for hydrogen production lies between 60 and 80 degrees Celsius. Here is the electrochemical reactions which takes place at the anode and cathode. In case of polymer electrolyte membrane technology, again, the temperature is between 50 and 80 degrees Celsius. Here you have an acidic solution, therefore you have the protons. In this case, you have the OH minus because these are alkaline. And in case of a solid oxide, unfortunately, you require a temperature between 600 and 900 degrees Celsius, because we are talking in terms of solid oxide, you have to have oxygen diffusion in the solid oxide membrane. So when you want an oxygen diffusion, although the temperature has been considerably reduced, the minimum temperature required for oxygen diffusion in the solid oxide is about 400 degrees Celsius. So although this is a good technology, solid oxide technology is a good technology because it is safe. However, the temperature requirement for diffusion is very high, and therefore this technology needs much more research in order to make it viable. These two technology, both alkaline electrolysis and acidic electrolysis, is a well-known technology which is there for last 50, 60 years. So now let's look into what really the recent results of alkaline electrolysis. Now here is a comparison of the working conditions for alkaline electrolyzers and polymer electrolyte membrane alkalizers. One of the most important aspect in both these conditions, both these techniques, is that you can see the lifetime of alkaline electrolyzer is about 10 years, whereas when you use acidic, it is between 3 to 4 years. Other conditions are very similar in both the techniques, except the solution is going to be different. So obviously, if one looks into the alkaline electrolyzer, it appears to be more promising technology in order to produce hydrogen. So these are some of the patented results which have come out from my lab over here. What here basically we see is the potential. This graph basically shows the potential versus the time. And the solution which I've used is a commercial solution, which is 30 weight% potassium hydroxide. What we can see from this graph is, what does this graph basically mean? It means that when I have an additive, when I add an additive to the potassium hydroxide, one can clearly see that the potential for hydrogen production has decreased considerably. So this is the experiment done at room temperature. This is done at 50 degrees Celsius. And in both the cases, one can clearly see that the requirement of power basically is less when you have an additive compared to without an additive. Now, one can clearly use Faraday's second law of electrolysis. It's a direct substitution process to calculate the amount of energy required in order to convert the hydrogen, or in order to produce hydrogen. So what we see over here is at room temperature, without the additive, we have a slightly higher energy requirement, whereas with additive, the energy requirement reduces considerably. So at room temperature, the energy saving based on Faraday's second law of electrolysis, obviously we have assumed a couple of things in this case, assuming that there is 100% efficiency and things like that. So we can clearly see that there is an energy reduction of about 17%. Now, in an industrial scenario, any energy reduction of about even 5% is excellent in terms of industrial scale. So a reduction of 17%, I think, would be pretty good. Now, when we increase the temperature to 50 degrees Celsius, the energy saving decreases by about 9%. So here we have 17, here we have 9. There are certain points which have to be further investigated as to why the energy reduction or energy saving is lower when you increase the temperature. However, there are certain clues and some more research has to be done in order to improve the energy savings. Now, these experiments have been done, the use of additives have been done, the experiments have been done extensively with various electrolytes, the combination of electrodes. So it appears that the additive is a universal additive. Where what that means is that with whatever electrolyte or whichever electrolyzer you're using, if you use these additives, it is obviously going to decrease the energy requirement for the production of hydrogen. So here, for example, in the last example, I had 30 weight% potassium hydroxide. In this example, I have 1 mole sodium hydroxide. So again, with the additive, one can clearly see that the energy saving is quite large. So what we can say from these slides is that the additive, when added, would decrease the energy saving by an average of between 7 to 10%. And the next part of the study is going to be that we need to scale up and see how long the additives are going to be effective. So these experiments have been done for an hour. So the next part of the project is going to be what happens when we run it for maybe 1 week and see how the process is, how the additive affects the hydrogen production process. The next part of the project, or next part of the hydrogen production, was to understand whether we could simply change the electrode configuration in such a way that we can decrease the energy requirement for the production of hydrogen. Now, in this case, the study was pretty simple. In commercial process, we have in commercial process, nickel is used as the cathode material for the production of hydrogen. So we looked into this fact. In this case, what we did is we looked into 2 aspects of nickel. One is using nickel foil, and the second aspect was using a nickel plate. Now, what's the difference between nickel foil and nickel plate? Now, from experiments, we clearly saw that in case of when we use nickel foil, obviously the energy requirement for hydrogen production was lower. So this graph basically talks about that. And so the obvious question is, what is really happening in nickel foil? Now here we looked into the structure and property relationship. And these two graphs, basically what we are showing is after 30 hours of the process, how does the nickel structure change? Now remember, this is an alkaline solution. We are using 1 mole of potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide or 38% potassium hydroxide. So obviously you are going into a very high alkaline region and you're going to have corrosion problems, corrosion issues. So therefore, after 30 hours of the hydrogen production process, one can clearly see that there is a slight increase in overpotential. That means that with time, there's going to be some nickel corrosion. And therefore, as with time, if you run the same process over for 30 hours, you're going to start requiring a slightly higher energy for the production of same amount of hydrogen. Okay, so in this case, what we can clearly see that when we have a nickel foil, after 30 hours of the process, the property of nickel remains almost same, whereas in case of nickel plate, one can clearly see that the requirement of energy is going to increase after a certain time. So in this case, what is the difference between nickel foil and nickel plate? So we did EBSD analysis or EBSD map. What is EBSD? EBSD is electron backscatter diffraction. So this is a technique where you can evaluate the structure of the material. So here we are looking into what the grain size of the different nickel material is. So on the left, we see that the nickel foil has a smaller grain size. So we have the scale basically gives you 200 micrometers. Here we have a much smaller grain size compared to nickel plate, which has a much larger grain size. And from XRD as well, we found that there is a strain within the nickel foil. Now, obviously, when you have a strain, it can affect in two different ways. It changes the adsorption properties of the alkaline material or alkaline solution. And therefore, in this case, luckily, the strain was a tensile strain. If you have a compressive strain, you would see a completely different structure of the nickel foil. So luckily, in this case, we had a tensile strain, and therefore, this tensile strain improved the adsorption properties and the electrochemical reactions of the alkaline solution, and therefore we had a better hydrogen production, and also it decreased the energy requirement for the production of hydrogen. So basically there are two factors which we have looked into now. We have looked into the structure property relationship, where the structure where we say that tensile strain is going to affect the hydrogen production and decrease the energy. And the second aspect is the additive which we have added into the electrolysis also would decrease the energy requirement for the production of hydrogen. So based on this, what we can conclude, of course, there are challenges. The first conclusion would be, compared to other hydrogen production, electrolysis is expensive, but does not require any carbon capture unit. In case of steam reforming techniques, we need carbon capture unit, so it would definitely decrease the cost, and we are going to produce green hydrogen in this case. In case of electrolysis, scale up is simple and the setup also is simple, although we have to look into these aspects to make it into a continuous process rather than at a batch process. So we have to, at present, it is a batch process technique. We will be looking into how to make it into a continuous process, or look into the experiments for a continuous process. It is possible to reduce the electricity requirement using renewable resources and using additives. So one of the things which we can clearly see that it requires between 50 and 80 degrees Celsius of temperature. So we can as well look into other renewable resources such as geothermal energy to couple these kinds of renewable resources to decrease the energy requirement. Also, we saw that strain improves the catalytic splitting of water and reduces the energy requirement. And certain studies, couple of studies have shown that this same process can be used for splitting seawater. So initial results have shown that the energy requirement for producing hydrogen using simulated seawater is efficient. However, there are corrosion issues which must be which more research is needed into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Abishek, and thank you for keeping on time. The presentation is open to comments and questions. If you could unmute yourselves, please, and ask your question.
Hi, thanks for the wonderful presentation. So I have a question regarding the transferring efficiency between electricity and hydrogen. So generally, what kind of efficiency can you achieve?
The efficiency is about between 50 and 60%.
Oh, that is quite high. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, so based on the experiments we have done in the lab, of course, scaling up efficiency might decrease, but from the calculations which we have done in the lab, so it's between 50 and 60%.
Okay, thank you.
That will include the use of hydrogen.
Yeah.
Abishek.
Yeah. So it's direct conversion from electricity to hydrogen. So that's the efficient. Yeah.
To hydrogen use.
Hydrogen use. Yeah. Hydrogen use. Yeah.
What you want the hydrogen to do? That's the overall efficiency.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's very good. Any other comments or questions?
Abishek, me.
Yeah.
Atanas. All right. The thing with the experiments with nickel foil and nickel plate.
Yeah.
I would assume that current density, surface area is everything the same, you know, compare. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Then in the salty water, you'll have electrochemical machining of the anode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with
so it will be sacrificial electrode, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? While you're thinking, you can see that there is a lot of research to be done in this direction. Research in chemistry, in the electrodes that we are using, in coatings, in converting, for example, the batch process into a flow process, and how we can achieve that, the integration with renewables. So I think Abishek has just opened up a complete new area of research for the Institute and for Brunel, which will take us quite some time. We cannot afford, for example, to have electrolysers that we will need to replace or throw away in 3 or 4 years. These problems have to be solved if we are going to go ahead. Last question, I think that Savas has his hands up, and then we can bring this to a close. Savas?
Yeah, Abishek, thanks very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I mean, what I wanted to ask, even though you indicated that really you don't have as yet a clear idea about the life of the additives, but do you have? I mean, is there a target that you are aiming at in terms of the life?
Yeah, we are looking into even if the life of because the additives are really cheap, it's not expensive at all. So even if the life of additive is sort of a couple of weeks or a week or at least a week or 10 days, that would be very efficient for the whole process. I think economically it would be very viable.
Okay. No, and then addition. I mean, would that affect the process or?
Ideally, it should not affect the process. So still some work has to be done. I have actually run for at least 10 hours without any effect of the additive. So but some more work has to be done in this
Great.
way.
And thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Abishek, and thank you to the audience for their questions. I think this more or less concludes the presentations that we have lined up for the various aspects of energy provision and the various aspects and technologies. We are now very nicely moving into a generic area. I'm very pleased to introduce Atanas Ivanov, who is going to talk about the manufacturing industry and how we can reduce the footprint. So Atanas, if you are ready, you can begin by sharing your screen.
Yes. I hope you can see it.
Yes, yeah, it's all fine. Thank you very much, Atanas.
Come on. Yes. All right. Moving to more generic things, as Tassos said, that's true. Another thing is, I was very happy to hear first all these comments of technical people, because now I'll touch upon the terminology which is not exactly used. Yeah, well, it is invented by technical people, but not exactly used in the society as technical people. So, what is a carbon footprint? Initially, a carbon footprint was considered only if we make the amount of carbon dioxide released in the atmosphere as a result of our activities. This seems not to be exactly the thing. Said, okay, yeah, but shall we add something more to that? Later, it was carbon dioxide and methane, because they, whatever is generated through the human's action. All right, UK economy is considered fifth economy in the world, and the top economies in the world have average carbon footprint for a person of 16 tons per year. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. Now, let's see what are the greenhouse gases and why we call them like that. I color them. First is water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, laughing gas, and ozone. So what's happening? You have heat coming from the sun, which hits the ground, and infrared, part of infrared radiation goes back. If hits CO2 molecule or water vapor molecule or methane, reflects back, and this way we keep a lot of heat on the surface of the ground. All right, if we have less of these elements in the air, the reflected infrared will go back in space and will keep the Earth cooler. All right. How to introduce the next thing in here is actually due to the global warming, large areas of Siberia, which was covered constantly in ice and snow, white, and reflected the UV back. Now it is black soil, which keeps the heat on the earth. At some aspect, people said that this would be happy. They would be happy to see this to continue the same way, because they can start planting crops in Siberia now. But what's happening in general as a term is completely different story. Now, we as academics are inventing terminology which later is used by politicians and journalists. And the meaning of this terminology is twisted quite a lot. One of the things, I'll introduce some of the things and then link them to the carbon footprint. First thing, we're talking about sustainable manufacturing. And now, the two presentation is you have economy, you have environmental, you have society, and when they intersect, this is considered sustainable. Yes, okay. This is from internet. But from another point, if I make a company, I'm making a company to make money. So for me, the main thing is to be sustainable is, can I make money? I employ people, and of course I work, and my company is on planet Earth and uses the environment. In here, it is a big problem of sustainability. Which sustainability? If you open the newspapers, majority of sustainability concerns the environment. But then can we make a difference between carbon footprint and what newspapers are talking about environment? For me, sustainable manufacturing is before everything economy, which works in society to support the society, and have to consider the legislation imposed regarding the environment. Because if I have a company and somebody else has another company in another country, and legislations are different, this is not fair for the guy who has to pay more. All right. Another term which we used, Six Sigma approach in manufacturing. All right, again, great speculations in the newspapers and journalists about what it is. Six Sigma, everything. Six Sigma is solving all the problems. No, it's not like that. Six Sigma simply is, I accept the risk. And this gives me what area I cover in order to be able to do something. In here, I gave an example for the people to understand. This is usually used to calculate how accurately I need to make things. If I say that I want 100% of all my production, 100% of all my production to be okay, then in this case, if I have to split 27.27 millimeters into 9 elements, I have to give 30 microns to each element. But if I assume that I may have 0.27% scrap, means I work under Six Sigma, my tolerances triples. All right, what does it mean that they triple? So what? This means that I'll use much less energy to produce this production. So this is a simple example, but see, when you read the newspapers, this is not there. There is no explanation behind what's the logic of this Six Sigma approach. In some cases, I may not need even to use Six Sigma. I can use Six Sigma if I have more, let's say, than 5 elements contributing to the fact. But if there are less, the chances are completely different, you know, trying to play lottery. Lean manufacturing. I have an expression for this saying, is lean mean or mean is lean? All right, well, lean manufacturing generally aims to get rid of things which do not give me enough profit, in a way. Okay, 5 lean principles and things like that. But okay, when the crisis was 2008, a lot of UK companies were going into the principle of lean manufacturing, managed to get rid of a lot of suppliers. They keep everything outside, which is not actually enough helping them to maintain the margins of profit. And then all this died, the economy struggled a lot because could not actually replace the suppliers. So this also contributes to a way, all right, I will get rid of things which are not generating enough profit for me, and I can get rid of waste, but somebody else has to do it. So how this is helping me to be carbon neutral? Not much, actually. The next is Industry 4, or, all right, in bracket I put digital manufacturing. This is something new, and the areas this part is dealing, it's industrial Internet of Things, big data, cloud computing, additive manufacturing, advanced robotics, augmented and virtual reality. All right, these are things which does not require a lot of waste, do not require a lot of, let's say, big energies in order to, like compared to steelworks, which can be good thing and can be a future for reducing the carbon footprint. But still people admit that Industry 4 and digitalization is currently some of the most discussed and yet less understood topics in manufacturing today. So this is still contradicting. As I say, we come with a terminology, and after that, in the years to come, we're trying to explain what we meant. As a general, to summarize all this, business or environment, I'm making a company in order to make money. The government and the legislation has to make me to follow specific rules. So, sustainable manufacturing is direct environmental impact. We have direct environmental impact because even some of the production can be focused on this. Six Sigma is less operation, less energy used. But again, I have to emphasize in here, this is for specific country. If I manage to get rid of this, somebody else has to take it. So are we generally, as planet Earth, benefiting from this? I have my doubts. Lean manufacturing, reduced waste. Yes, we agree on reducing the waste, reducing the energy. And Industry 4 is activities with less energy usage. Fine. Not like steelworks, but I have to keep for hours molten metal. Now, what can we say about the UK fluctuation of the carbon footprint? The picture on the right, I hope we don't see this anymore, well, or at least not to that extent. But over the years, UK greenhouse gas emissions. If you notice, these are households, goods and services embedded in importation and aviation. All right, over the years, we have some fluctuation, but we do not have any substantial, let's say, 3 times less. No, we can have 10, 15%, something like that, goes down, goes up. So I would not expect for the next years this picture to change. We may reduce some small percentages, but we cannot still talk about to halve the usage of some sources and things like that. Based on this, now, when I was trying to find greenhouse gas emissions by sector in the UK, then I found something which is a lot more interesting, which I suspected that this is the reason for the things. So, in energy, we have 21%. In transport, 27%. Agriculture is always high, not only in the UK, it's across the world. Residential, as you saw it, nearly constant over the years. Business, nearly constant over the years. But now, the very, very, very big thing in here is, all right, this is UK, but we are importing energy. We are bringing stuff from outside. If I have an electric car, I wish to have one actually, then I can claim that I have a green transportation. I have solar panels outside, I use the electric power from the sun. All right, but what is the carbon footprint of my car, of my batteries, but not in the UK, worldwide? And I found this picture, which is really shocking for me, that for energy is 73.2% globally. So we cannot neglect this. We cannot say, oh, in UK we are okay. because if somebody else created a huge carbon footprint for what I think it's not that it's green, it's environmental friendly, is not the right thing. We live on the same planet. So generally, as you see, agriculture is substantial area. Waste and industry. Industry is 5.2% compared to energy 73%. That's huge. This was the shocking thing for me, which I found. Because country for country, we can say, yeah, this year we reduced it. This year we reduced our carbon footprint. But generally, globally, does it make sense? That's why I started with this. If I have a company, I make this company to make profit. It's down to the government to give me the legislation for the environment, which I have to follow. But this legislation has to be agreed on the summit across all countries in the world. Otherwise, it's not fair. And this is, you know how many summits till now, and they cannot agree what is the CO2 emissions, what are generally the greenhouse gases emissions, and carbon footprint of UK manufacturing sector. Only steel and chemicals are nearly half. Cement, food and drink, paper, plastic, aluminium, motor manufacturing, textile, printing, and this, what is called other, is probably the biggest reserve what we can work on. Steel can chop part of it, chemicals can chop part of it, but in percentages. But others is something actually what we have to focus on for the future in order to be able to reduce it substantially. Because there are a lot of things in here like wastes and things like that, which are causing a big problem, huge energy consumptions and wasting of resources. What will be the family carbon footprint? Gas. When we're burning, well, it's considered that natural gas is green. No, it's not. It creates CO2 and water when you burn it at home. So every time we put your gas cooker, you have to know that you're producing CO2. Maybe it doesn't sound nice to you, but this is it. Electricity is 19-20% nearly. Holidays, car, clothes, food. Food is still a huge sector, 20%. Nearly like electricity. So this is how looks the carbon footprint of a family. What can I say in conclusion? Reducing the carbon footprint is mostly related to reduction of the energy used globally. You remember the big red blob, 73%. Otherwise, we cannot change much. We can say our country now, this year is better. Yeah, but generally we are not. It's important what each individual country is doing for the reduction of the carbon footprint, but most important is what countries are doing on the global scale. Moving to smart manufacturing process is a good way forward. This was Industry 4, but still 20% of the energy used is not productive. CNC machines, robots, whatever, they move most of the time in the air. Then this is not productive. 1/5 of energy is wasted. For each product has to be considered the total accumulated carbon footprint, as I gave example with the battery of my imaginary electric car. Not only partially created in a separate industry or even a separate country. All right, now something interesting. Very soon, 7 and 8 of June, it will be the 2022 Decarbonization Summit in June. It will be in Manchester. So maybe some of you will be interested. And thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Atanas. Very stimulating discussion, presentation. The presentation is now open for comments and questions. If you could please unmute yourselves and ask your question. Mohammed, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Atanas, for the excellent presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I'm very interesting about the greenhouse gas emission for the transport of 27%. So definitely there is something need to be done there.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're going to talk about this one later on when we discuss the electric vehicles and so on. So is it the food industry, the one you see, we can cut more into the sort of greenhouse gas emission, or is just for all over these areas?
See, my main message is that actually whatever we do, if it's not done globally, we are not doing much.
Yeah.
We live in the same room called planet Earth.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah. Okay.
If I can add there, Mohammed, in the UK we are producing 1% of the carbon emissions. So even if we fix our 1%,
yeah,
we don't work with our international partners. So if we fix our 1% by 50%, it's 50% of 1%.
Yeah.
So I think the strong point that is coming out of Adana's presentation is that you put the environment as a big circle, and you have to bring the countries together to actually agree the required legislation that will actually help us all as we try to do more research in this area.
Yeah. Another thing is the natural gases which each family has.
Yeah.
It's considered green. It's not green. It produces CO2 in huge amounts, actually.
Yeah. One kilogram of methane, I think, produces 2.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So if you burn 1 kilogram, you're actually getting a lot of CO2 out there. Savas had his hand up. Savas, please go ahead.
Atanas, thanks very much for the thought-provoking presentation.
This was the idea.
Now, the question I have is about Industry 4, really. I have difficulty in understanding the concept myself, but my question is really moving towards digitalization.
Yes.
And of course, we use more and more computing power, and of course, we have all the data centers to support that computing that we need. Have you thought about really the energy required for these data centers and to support them, and then whether overall really the balance is beneficial in terms of carbon reduction?
All right. How to say? The whole idea is to create something what we call, let's say, smart manufacturing. I personally, I'm not supporter of digital manufacturing. For me, this doesn't mean much. It doesn't mean much. But smart manufacturing, where you have machine, jigs and fixtures, tools, software, everything has to talk together in order to optimize the process. Now, at the moment, as I said, we have 1/5, 20% wasted in non-productive. That's why, for example, mass production things, they don't use this type of machines. They don't need this type of things. They are hard logic. I design a machine to make this part. When the part is finished, I scrap the machine, job done. And then the efficiency is much higher. And that's why the price in mass production is much lower.
So you are advocating really mass production rather than
Yes.
of small-scale distributed manufacturing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, that's a good point.
Because there is a lot of arguments about particularly food manufacture, really, and there is this sort of group of people that advocate mass manufacture. The current approaches are probably the best approaches, and then of course the other side you say, distributed manufacturing close to the local communities might be sort of more both environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
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 Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Atanas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Atanas, thank you from all of us for a very sort of stimulating. I must say, when I asked you to present this, I didn't know what was going to come up. So that was extremely sort of to the point. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to move to our next presentation, and I think our speaker is getting ready, or he was ready. So Dale McClure will talk about sustainable production of high food ingredients, which links very nicely with the presentation from Atanas. So Dave, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tassos. I assume you can see my slides just fine?
Yes, we can see slides, yeah.
All right, brilliant. So this, I guess, is a little bit different to the previous talks, but as Tassos said, it links quite nicely with some of the issues that Atanas has raised. So in terms of thinking about food production, currently we're faced with some quite significant challenges. And the first of these is simply population growth. So it's projected that there'll be around 9.7 billion people by 2050. And one of the fundamental questions is simply, how do we make enough food to feed these people? And the second interesting part that follows on from this is also there's a demographic change. And actually people over 65 are the fastest growing age group at the moment. And from a food perspective, this creates some interesting challenges because generally as we age, we lose the ability to take up nutrients from our diet. And so older people might want to have more specialized foods that are more nutrient rich. And so this creates a challenge for food production. And the other big challenge with food production is that currently it's estimated there are 2 billion people globally that suffer deficiencies in some kind of micronutrients. And these deficiencies obviously have significant health drawbacks for these people. And the interesting part of this as well is that this isn't just in places where traditionally you would think people have food deficiencies. This sort of thing is being observed more and more in the West from changes in diets where we're consuming things that perhaps have enough calories but are lacking in micronutrients that meet our nutritional requirements. And of course, in terms of food production, there's issues around current agricultural practices. So these can lead to things like water pollution, deforestation, overfishing, and this obviously negatively impacts our ability to produce more food. And finally, there's climate change, which is going to affect existing food production techniques, and it's going to affect agricultural yields. So what we really need are some ways of addressing these challenges to ensure that we can keep everyone fed and that everyone has a suitable diet to keep them healthy. And in terms of what new technologies we want to develop, these should ideally have several characteristics. And so one of these is it would be fantastic if we could work out ways of making foods that compete with existing food production methods. And in particular, if we can think about how we can potentially produce food without using too much arable land. And similarly, if we can avoid competition with drinking water sources, because this will avoid problems. We also want to be able to produce healthy foods and potentially produce foods that are rich in micronutrients. And again, this is to address the challenges and make sure that we can produce foods that are healthy for people. Something else that's important is that food production methods are cost effective. So we want everyone to be able to have access to healthy and affordable food. And finally, any technologies need to be scalable. Anything that's developed can't just be small scale and suited to a laboratory environment. It needs to be a technology that ultimately can be scaled up or scaled out to produce enough food for millions, if not billions of people. And we can see here that these changes are very neatly and strongly aligned with some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So in terms of food, there's quite some problems and challenges that we need to address. And one approach that's getting more and more interest is using microorganisms for food production. And the advantage of using microorganisms is firstly that they grow relatively quickly. And so this means that they can be very productive in terms of producing food. So if you think about a plant, for example, it might take months, if not years, for the plant to grow to the point where it can be harvested. Whereas for a microorganism, you might be talking hours or days for that to happen. The other nice thing about microorganisms is that there are some species that have relatively low nutrient requirements. So they can be grown using things like hydrogen, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and light. And this compares to some other microorganisms where traditionally they've used carbohydrates as the feed. The other good thing about microorganisms is that they're rich sources of micronutrients. So things like vitamins, omega-3 fatty acids, amino acids, and other compounds essential for health. And finally, there's lots of increased consumer interest in these sorts of foods. So things like different novel foods, fermented foods, and cultured meat. And microorganisms also have the advantage of being seen as vegan. And using microorganisms in food is not necessarily new. This is something that's been happening for thousands of years. So if you think about things like yogurt, cheese, wine, these have used microorganisms in some capacity. However, there are some issues in terms of expanding their use to be a more common food product. And the first of these is just consumer acceptance. And so that's getting the general public to eat these kinds of foods. But this doesn't at the moment seem to be a deal breaker. People, or at least a significant portion of the population, is open to trying these new foods. Another challenge is regulatory approval. And so just how these kinds of novel foods can go through the regulatory process to be approved for human consumption. And there's also some technical challenges. So the first of these is picking out suitable production strains. So in terms of microorganisms, there's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of species that could be potentially used. And a really difficult biotechnological question is how do you identify the most suitable species that can be used for industrial scale production? Another problem is scaling up the process. So taking something that works in a lab and then making it economic at a large scale is a challenge in the biotechnology industry. And that's also related to the final point, which is production costs. So compared to some alternative processes, biotech processes have lower productivity generally. They can have high capital costs and or high operating costs. And these sorts of issues still are drawbacks for commercializing some of these processes. So for example, if we think about cultured meat, fundamentally, one of the biggest challenges facing that process at the moment is just the extremely high operating costs involved in producing a kilo of cultured meat. So I'll talk a little bit about my work in addressing these challenges. And the first thing I will talk about is process development using microalgae. And so the first question we want to think about is what are microalgae and why should we use them? So microalgae are small photosynthetic microorganisms, and they're very interesting because they produce a range of valuable compounds. And we can see some of them here. These are carotenoid pigments and phycocyanin, which is a nice blue color. And these have some applications in the food industry already. So if you see like beta carotene or astaxanthin, if you've had farmed salmon, astaxanthin is actually added to the fish feed to make the fish the nice pink color, because if the fish don't have this added to their diet for farmed salmon, the flesh will actually be sort of a gray color. And so these already have some applications in the food industry. And the interest is how can we make these processes more widely available? And the other nice thing about microalgae is that they're photosynthetic. And so this means that light and carbon dioxide are the main feedstocks for the process. And they can also be grown in seawater without using arable land. So an example of our work here was looking at making phytoquinone, which is vitamin K. And these are vitamins which are essential for human and animal health. And then so having vitamin K is essential for making your blood clot properly. And there's also evidence that having a good intake of vitamin K is important for your bone health, particularly for people as they age. And the best dietary sources of K vitamins at the moment are either seaweed, which is not something that's eaten a lot in a Western diet, and also green leafy plants. And so our research question was, can we make a better source of vitamin K using microalgae? And so the first thing that we did is we screened around 15 to 20 strains of microalgae to see which one would be the most suitable. And what we found was that there were certain species of cyanobacteria which were very good sources. And you can see some of those results here. So compared to the best dietary source we were able to measure, there was about 6 times higher concentration in the microalgae. And so all you really needed to eat was 1/3 of a gram of the dry algae powder, and this would give you your recommended daily intake of vitamin K. And the other nice thing about the biotechnological process we developed is that compared to the existing chemical synthesis process, the biotech process produces 100% of the active product. The next step in this was, well, now that we had a sort of a proof of concept at a small scale, could we make this larger? And could we improve the process? And so what we did was we scaled up the process to a 50-liter kind of scale. And in doing this, we were able to demonstrate proof of concept and also generate enough of the biomass to test it on animals. And we found that it was non-toxic and there was no issues in terms of feeding this to mice. And so to summarize this example of our work, this was the first study where we developed a scalable, sustainable production technology for phytoquinone. And the nice thing about this is that the reactor design that we used can be readily scaled up or scaled out. And in addition to being a good source of vitamin K, their biomass also has a lot of protein in it, and it's also a good source of vitamin B12. So this could potentially be added to foods, either for humans or animals, in order to deliver improved nutritional benefits. And the next case study of work that we're looking at is how we design better bioreactors. And really, as I mentioned previously, a key challenge in bioprocessing is how do you scale the process up? And you can see some examples on this slide here. So typical lab scale equipment is sort of a few liters in volume, whereas if we think about large scale production reactors, which will be used for producing foods and chemicals, these are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of liters in size. So we want to understand how these reactors work, but the challenge is that there's complex interactions between the mixing inside these reactors and how the microorganisms grow. And it's very difficult to do experimental measurements at an industrial scale. Most companies are very hesitant to let you do that. And so to address these challenges, we've increasingly looked at modeling. So here we've developed over several years CFD models of these processes. And with these models, we can quantify the process performance, test different reactor designs, and we're also able to visualize the process. And this visualization is really the key, because then we can use these models as tools to scale up processes and quantify reactor performance. And we can see roughly how that looks here. So this is just an example of the modeling. This is what happens when you put the feed in at the top of the reactor. So this is just the sugar. And we can see in the movie here, it's being distributed throughout the reactor by the mixing and also taken up by the microorganisms. So using these computational tools, we're able to predict where we have perhaps hotspots, so too much feed, and also zones where there is potentially not enough. And the other very nice thing about these models is that they've been validated at an industrial scale. So we were actually very lucky to have an industrial partner who let us make measurements on their real plant and quantify the performance of the process. So we can take these models and apply them to different reactor designs. And so this slide here is just an example of things that were done in collaboration with Novozymes and DTU, looking at their reactors. And using these tools, we can have a deep understanding of the reactor performance. And also we can visualize our process and develop improved reactors, which is a key process in scaling up bio-based manufacture and ensuring that it can be sustainable and cost effective. So to summarize our research, microorganisms can be used for sustainable production of foods and food ingredients. And having improved computational tools can make the scale up easier and potentially more cost effective. And we can also take what we've learned here and apply it to production of other things. So for example, high value chemicals and bioplastics. Finally, thank you to all my collaborators with help with the work. And thank you all for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, quite different to what we have been talking about, but still taking us into a direction where we need to provide food for the population before we can do anything else. That comes from two aspects of work. One is the energy provision, but the other is the innovative work that you have been doing, Dale, and you and your team. It is open for questions. There's a hand up from Angus, I believe.
Hi, thanks, Tassos. Yeah, very nice talk. I agree with that. Quite a number of algae produce toxins and carcinogens that are extremely potent, even at very low concentrations. So presumably you'd have to assay for those, and that would, I mean, one would think that would add quite significantly to the expense. So how do you propose to get around that?
I think that's a very good question. I think fortunately, from a water quality perspective, a lot of the species that produce toxins and carcinogens have been identified. And so the way around that is simply you wouldn't use those strains for producing food.
Okay. Well, people are thinking, one question from me there, is it something you will need to educate people to accept it a bit more, or do you think we are all going to go along with the new ideas that are being discussed here?
I think that's a very interesting question. And from what I have read, there is different consumer opinions on the issue.
Right.
So I think in terms of, say, the algae, people, it seems to be sort of a natural and healthy product.
Right.
So people generally are quite positive about that one. If there's a lot of interest in, say, genetically modifying, say, yeast to make, sort of milk or milk-like proteins or egg-like proteins, and people tend to be a bit more hesitant around genetic modification of food as well. Right.
Okay. So it's a pathway that we need to follow, that we need to.
Yeah, I think since there's a lot of different technologies in the space, there's definitely a pathway, but it's also, I think that's not a one size fits all sort of answer.
Okay.
I think it will depend on, different groups and also different foods.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've got Salman with his hand up. Please, Salman. Salman, did you put your hand up or?
Just I'm muted. Okay. So Dale, thanks very much for the very interesting presentation. I mean, my knowledge in this topic really is very limited, so my question may be a bit naive. But with regards to the production of vitamin K from algae, I mean, you've done, I think, this research, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. Is that, I mean, how has it progressed? Has it been sort of applied commercially?
No, not yet.
No?
I think there's a very interesting point. I think with biotech processes, you always have to compete against, I guess, the chemical process.
Uh-huh.
And the direct competition there is that sometimes the chemical process is much, much more productive.
Okay.
So from a direct sort of productivity process, that it's challenging to compete there. The nice thing about the biotech process would be making a food that is rich in vitamin K that has other good things with it as well.
Okay. And what about the energy? I mean, if you compare the two different sort of processes in terms of energy, I mean, which one would it have more energy demand or energy intensive process?
That is a very good question. I honestly would have to work out the numbers on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I know the chemical process, it's quite lengthy. There's a lot of solvents and separation steps involved, and it's sort of a traditional fine chemical process. So the final product yield isn't particularly high.
Okay.
Whereas the biotech process, it's room temperature, room pressure. But yeah, that's a very good question.
Okay, it's very interesting. Great, thanks very much.
Okay, I think that would bring us to the end of the morning session. I'd like to thank first Dale now as our last speaker, but also thank all the speakers. I think the quality of presentations, we must all say, was excellent. We discussed a lot of issues, and I can see the worry that academics, our colleagues have, both about the provision of energy, food, the environment, and I think we are very much in leading in certain areas and working very hard in others. And it was a very pleasant scene for me to see this road that we are all on. So again, thank you very much. I think you all deserve a round of applause to everybody for this morning. Yeah. We will take a lunch break now, and the schedule is that we will return to start at 13:30, and I think Maria is ready, and she will have her lunch break now, and she will take over at 13:30. So please return to your computer screens.
It's 1:30, yeah.
Sharply at 1:30, so Maria can start in time. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you. See you in a few minutes. Yes.
Bye. Thank you.